This week we're talking about barriers to Christian neighboring. We're glad you're here. All right. So, what are some barriers that you can think of to being a neighbor to your neighbors? Of getting to know them. What's that?
Busyness.
Yes. Busyness. What else?
Not knowing them.
What's that?
Not knowing them.
Not knowing them.
Backgrounds.
Backgrounds. A lot of those. Yeah.
Being an introvert.
Yes. Uh-huh. Ooh, we're going to talk about that. Mm-hmm.
I think knowing that they have a different lifestyle.
Yeah.
And have choices.
Yeah, they're them being so wildly different from you, potentially.
Yeah.
You know,
Their
They're-
belief system.
the belief system. Yeah.
Not there.
Yeah, just apathetic. Yeah. I recently got a book that says Apathyism, How to Share When They Don't Care. I haven't read it yet, but it was super catchy, so I had to get it. But I'll let you know if it's good. Or you can read it yourself and figure it out. But that is super prevalent. And yeah. What do you do if they don't care? Do you not be a good neighbor? No. But how do you neighbor to that, you know? What else? If Whitney was here, she would say, past conflicts. I got permission from her to, hers is super funny. They have a petty conflict in the past where Logan Decker was pressure washing his house at like 9 at night because it was the summer. And Logan Decker was like, this is a great time to do this. And make sure I don't tell this wrong. And the neighbor was like, don't. And Logan was like, I mean, I'm going to, or something like that. I'm sure it was way more polite than that. But now the neighbor, I'm sure I'm not representing him very well, sorry. But the neighbor now will like wave at Whitney and will just completely ignore Logan. And so they're actively trying to figure out like, I told Logan you should offer to pressure wash your house. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that's, I mean, it's funny and it's petty, but that's a real roadblock, you know. Being scared, just straight up scared, like maybe woven in with anxiety. There's a few of these we're going to talk about today. The first one, maybe getting locked into a relationship, right? Once you know your neighbor, you're going to know them. It's a long-term commitment, unless you move every time you don't like your neighbors. You'll always see them, and you cannot get away from them, for better or for worse, right? Past conflicts. Awkwardness will not kill you, right? That's what Whitney's been talking about a lot. Are you really going to make an idol of your emotional comfort? You have to wonder to yourself, you know, it's a lot more comfortable for me to not enter into this relationship where it could be potentially awkward, or I have to feel awkward, have awkward interactions with this person. Let's see. Let me get this over here.
What about fear?
Yeah, absolutely. Fear is the next. Absolutely. Fear, I think the two biggest ones would have to be fear, anxiety, and being busy. And you feel like you're scared of just something in general, but it's that person right across the street.
Kind.
Yeah.
And we know bad things happen to bad people or bad things happen to good people. And I don't know, you just open the news.
Yeah.
And I try not to, but you can open the news and see things happening in middle school and elementary school and daycares. It's like, it can happen in daycare. Why couldn't it happen next door?
I know.
So you're opening yourself up to the possibility.
Yeah.
Or that risk that they could not be having your best intentions at heart.
That is perhaps the biggest one for me right now with children in my home, right? So we've been studying a lot from the Good Samaritan, the story of the Good Samaritan. That's in, if you want to turn to it, you can. It's in Luke 10. We're going to reference that just a little bit real quick. Mark, Luke. So in this story, the Levite and the priest both pass along this guy that's been beaten up, laying on the road, right? And we talked about how kind of the hero in this story is the Good Samaritan, the guy that actually stops and helps him. But when you think about the Levite and the priest, I don't think they're true villains, right? They both would have been put at risk by stopping to help this guy. I mean, this guy's like severely wounded. You got to wonder how that happened. Was this man laying on the road a setup? Like, that's real fear. Like, if they stop with him, will they then be preyed upon? Like, who knows exactly everything they were thinking and all the rationalization. And they're not necessarily villains. Like, they could be putting themselves at risk by stopping and doing this. Were there more attackers waiting to jump out? Fear surely would have justified their decision to pass the man by on the road, right? So there's a book called Next Door as It Is in Heaven. The authors Lance Ford and Brad Briscoe talk about how fear keeps so many of us from living like Jesus. One of the authors says that as a typical American, he bought into the notion, quote, "Our home is our castle. It is our personal space that ought not be intruded upon. While we had people in our home on a regular basis, it was almost always at our convenience. Then, the author says, I realized that I assumed the greatest need of my family is safety. I learned that our greatest need is the experience of loving and serving like Jesus did. The real question is not how dangerous is that stranger. The real question is how dangerous will I become if I'm not more open?" I've really had to wrestle with this because I have little kids in my home, and I have friends who, back in Tennessee, who have shared with me just stories of bringing strangers in the home and there not being any barriers put around it, and just trusting God and not being any sort of mindfulness. So that is real, because your children are your spiritual charge too, right? But they're not your only spiritual charge. How do we balance that? How do we bring people into our home? I don't believe the answer is not bringing people into your home at all. I think that's something you always wrestle with and you need to be wise about and consult other people about, right? But there's, I've been talking about this book, The Gospel Comes with a House Key, and I left the cover off and I wish I could find it, but it's this beautiful teal color. And I love this book so far. It's written by a woman whose husband is a pastor in the Reformed Presbyterian Church, and she lives out something called Radically Ordinary Hospitality. She's written a lot of books on it, and it's nothing at all like what I thought it was going to be. But she has 4 children, and they're all adopted children, or they were adopted. And she talks about this as a parent, like, how do I display the service of Christ in my home with people like this, but mind my children? So I wanted to read a small note that she said on this. And this has just been from her experience and her observation. Just imagine a beautiful teal color on this book as you look. She says, sometimes we fear, it says, and we'll move into this verse immediately after, let perfect love cast out fear. She says, sometimes we fear that our neighbors will bring into our homes problems and issues that we are not ready to discuss in front of our children. We pit the command to nurture and teach our children in the fear and admonition of the Lord against the command to love our neighbor. We must stop and think this through. On the one hand, we of course must protect our children from harm. On the other hand, we must not presume that sheltering them will accomplish this. Perhaps our children need to know that when they confront doubts and fears, sexual temptations, and moral and faith crises, we will not be shocked, offended, or hurt by this reality. Our children need to know that we know how serious the enemy is, how alien and powerful our righteousness in Christ is, and how deep and wide and big and powerful our sin can become if we hide it. But if we have a ministry to the lost, and if our children know that we truly love our unbelieving neighbors, if they have witnessed us coming alongside those who are struggling or burdened or falling under the weight of sin and tragedy, perhaps, and just perhaps, our children will trust us with their deep things. Perhaps they will remember that we embraced our neighbors and strangers, that we loved them and prayed for them, and that we were not jostled or unsettled to share parties or barbecues, our churches and our homes with troubled people. Perhaps our love of those image bearers, all of them, especially the difficult ones, will be a pledge to our children that the mosaics of their private lives are safe with us. And I felt a lot of peace when I read that, as well as struggle, but just I don't have to know it all one way or the other, right? But it is important that you perform that and that you teach your children that. And if you don't have children, that you let your community see that no one's off limits to your hospitality just because they're of the world. In 1 John 4:18 through 21, it says, "There's no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. We love because he first loved us. If anyone says, 'I love God,' and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, who he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him: whoever loves God must also love his brother." I don't pretend to have all the answers on that one because I know there's some real traumas that people have lived through in their own neighborhoods, in their own homes, and in the homes of other neighbors. I'm not pretending like those don't exist. So even more so, I know that I need to source from all of you wisdom on how do I navigate this, because I don't know. But I know that I must. I know that I must be hospitable to my neighbor and also keep my children safe. It's not one or the other. The next barrier to neighboring seems kind of silly, but it's time. It's being busy. Someone over here said that. Was that you? Being busy. Being super busy seems to be a status symbol, right? A cultural norm and something we strive for. Romans 12:12 says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." So, do we live at a pace that allows us to be available to those who live around us in this trendy, got to be super busy and exhausted? Busy and exhausted people are productive, and we must be productive, right? Or we're lazy, right? No. But that's what I see all the time on social media. How to do 500 things before 6 a.m. Stuff like that. It's like, I haven't seen 6 a.m. in a while. I'm thankful to say. I'm sure I'll see it again. But I haven't had to see 6 a.m. in a little while because my children are sleeping for the time being. But you see that all the time, like how to be insanely productive before anyone else is awake. But do you live at a pace that allows yourself to be available to other people? Do you have commitments that you could reprioritize or simply give up? Good things can get in the way of important things. Who do we see that with? Two wonderful women in the New Testament, alliterative people, Mary and Martha. In Luke 10, Jesus has been invited into the home of Mary and Martha and is teaching the disciples. Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Martha is super irritated about it because she's the one running around preparing food and cleaning and playing the part of hostess. She vents to it about Jesus, and Jesus tells her in verse 41, "My dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her." Sometimes we have to say no to good things to focus on the important things. In her busyness, Martha missed out on something very important. The things she was doing are good, and they mattered, right? But they were not more important than the opportunity right in front of her.
I think that's a really good example of how hospitality is more than just feeding people. I mean, I have been in that trap so many times in my life where I'm running around trying to take care of the meal that I'm getting ready to have, cleaning the house and getting ready for the people that, one, I may be exhausted by the time we get there and not even into because I'm whatever, but more than that, I have pushed my children away while I'm trying to do this good thing.
Yes.
And realize that the irony of that.
Yes.
I'm trying to do this hospitality thing and I'm pushing my children away. So,
I feel that so hard. I've been thinking about that this week. We had the privilege of making a meal for someone, and I was snapping at Patsy, "Will you get out of my way? I'm trying to make a meal for someone."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, what have I done?" Like just like on the way to church, I'm like, "Hurry up, we're gonna be late for Bible class." It's like scream at your child while you're trying, And she's associating performance and stress and putting on airs with serving, and that's not authentic, right? And that's I've experienced that in the past where I will plan all week to have these people over, and every part of my house, and all the meal, all the things, and I get there. And I'm so stressed the whole time. Afterwards, Jeffrey says, "That was awesome." And I'm like, "I'm glad you had a good time." And that's when I realized I've done something wrong. That that rolls over onto your kids, onto your guests. And I'm excited to spend more time in the future and not be the only voice talking about what hospitality in the home is and isn't, because it's supposed to be a reflection of the love and comfort we feel in Christ, right? And the pattern that we see of that throughout the Bible. And it's not supposed to be make sure everyone's glass is on a coaster. It's not supposed to be that sort of thing. John Ortberg wrote something about hurry sickness. He writes, "Love and hurry are fundamentally incompatible. Love always takes time, and time is the one thing hurried people don't have." I've been trying to remember that with my children, that hurrying children constantly creates anxiety. Well, that's the same thing for adults too, right? And so imagine if you live your whole life that way. Is that really healthy? Physiologically, no. Spiritually, absolutely not. We must keep the main thing, the main thing. There's an illustration where you have a bucket of sand, a bucket of water, and a bucket of big old rocks. And you want to put them all in one container, one bucket. You've probably heard this. And if you try and put the sand in first, and then the rocks, maybe the rocks will get in there, probably not, and the water will go everywhere. If you try and put the water in first, and then the rocks, and then the sand, it's definitely not going to fit. But if you put the rocks in first, then the sand, then the water, they all filter, sift down, and fit together. And that's just the way we should prioritize and structure our lives, right? What are the rocks? What are the immovably important things? And I hope you answer with something spiritual and grounded in your faith. I hope Bible study, church, family prayer time, things centered around spirituality, Christianity, serving your neighbor. I hope those are the rocks. For me, I've had to do an inventory of my hobbies. Do I have hobbies that are getting in the way of serving other people? Good things, reading, TV, more reading, are those getting in the way of service? Good things are good things, but they can get in the way of important things. Keep space in your schedule. Be interruptible. Jesus was constantly interrupted to serve other people. He was constantly on the way to do something, and someone would touch his garment. He would say, "Who did that?" He would heal people along the way, make a point of stopping to heal people when he could have just thought it and they would be healed. He made a point of stopping and giving someone his time and interacting with them, making them feel seen and loved, and then continuing on his way. The Good Samaritan was on his way to something. He wasn't just wandering around looking for beat up people, I'm sure. He was on his way to something. He allowed his schedule to be disrupted, but not destroyed. He put the guy up, paid for all the things he would need, got him settled, and then continued on. He still had a life he was living and goals he was headed towards, but they were flexible enough that he could be interrupted. Do I live my life like that? Or am I so rigid that I'm like, I don't have an hour to give to this person today. I can schedule it in about 3 weeks. I'm trying to learn how to give a whole day free in my schedule. That seems impossible, but I want to be flexible for other people because that is the example that is set before me by Jesus stopping in this parable, being flexible and allowing time for other people. And a final barrier that I want to look at and really explore what the Bible has to say about this is anxiety. There is quite a level of anxiety when it comes to neighboring. Philippians 4:6 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God." There's a phrase that says, "Give it to God." There's a lot of, it's "let go and let God," right? That is a good phrase for certain things. This is not referring to anxiety disorders or anxieties that are a result of trauma. There wasn't even a concept of that when this was being written. It existed, but this is really referring to everyday anxieties, like, what are we going to eat tomorrow? How are we going to pay this bill tomorrow? My so-and-so is sick, my so-and-so is getting a test result, and I don't know, like all those daily anxieties. This is not referring to a trauma response or some sort of anxiety disorder, okay? So if you struggle with an anxiety disorder, it is not a reflection of you not giving it to God enough. Don't hear that way, okay? But even having an anxiety disorder doesn't exempt you from loving your neighbor, right? It means that Neighboring can be a bigger barrier this is a bigger barrier for you in neighboring. We each walk with Christ differently, with different difficulties and struggles, and this might be the one for you. It is a harder task for you than others. It means maybe you need to seek professional help in learning how to live with your anxiety and learning ways to work through it and methods to eliminate it. Something that is extremely helpful for the anxious is your church family. You lean on them. You let them teach you the things that they know. You let them carry you through this foreign process. I am very good at small talk. I could do it all day long. There are a number of things that I'm not good at. I would love to trade skills with you. You teach me literally anything else, and I will teach you how to talk about anything for hours, right? We can swap skills for ministry. I don't have all of them. That's why I have you. We are supposed to do this together. Some people do not have an anxiety disorder, but they are just simply and only introverted. There's a difference. This means introverted people charge off of alone time. Extroverted people charge off of time with others. But being introverted seems to be a trendy new term, an excuse to not talk to other people. They say, I'm not a people person, or I hate people. I've heard that said a lot, and it is completely antithetical to the gospel. It's completely opposite of the gospel, to hate people. Jesus was a people person, 100%. And I don't know if it came easy to him. I don't know. Jesus spent a lot of time charging alone too, right? But he was a people person, that I know. You are called to be a people person, whether or not it comes naturally. Certain elements of Christianity, like I said, are harder for some people than others. I am very extroverted, painfully so. I'm not scared of talking to people. I've never been scared of talking to people. Because of that, I have a hard time empathizing with people who do. Not being able to empathize doesn't mean I don't care. It just means I'm not familiar with that experience. I recognize this as a spiritual gift that I have, which means it's an obligation I have to use it to serve other people. But how do you grow in this if you're not a people person? Some of the best advice I have been given is that you pray. And that might, I hope you don't roll your eyes. I've rolled my eyes getting that response before too. It might seem like a cop-out, but if God wants you to be a people person and wants you to overcome that anxiety or that dread, I believe he does, he will give you that energy and he will give you that peace and he will walk you through it. Or he will put people in your life that will help you get through it. Yes, ma'am.
One of the thoughts that I have is that, introverts and extroverts would just do things differently. And, and an introvert doesn't mean you don't like people. You just
Right.
take it in smaller doses, and, and maybe not as grand.
Right, yeah.
And that you do it to the way that fits your own personality. 'Cause
Absolutely.
There's a lot of ways to connect and be hospitable to other people that don't include like having like the whole neighborhood over
Right.
for a party. There's a lot of ways to do it. Maybe an introvert's more of a one-on-one or smaller.
Absolutely.
So just do it that fits your own personality, and then because like you said, we all have different gifts, and
Right.
introverts need time.
Yeah.
They do need time to regroup. I know. I love coming to church, but when I come home, I'm exhausted because I'm being around a lot of people because I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
And so that, and it's just kind of one of those things I say. It's okay. It's all right.
Yes, it's 100% okay.
So, take time to regroup and then go on again. It doesn't have to be grand.
Right, and I don't mean to conflate hating people and introversion. I'm not saying those are. Society likes to say those are the same. People use that as, I'm an introvert. You can love people and be introverted. I'm married to someone who's an introvert. Doesn't mean he's shy, it means he spends time charging alone. Yes, ma'am.
I think a lot of times introverts are almost, I don't want to say better at it, but we watch.
Yes,
We
you
think a
notice.
lot.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do connect on that one-on-one,
More thought out.
yeah, you really, you
Mhm.
can, like when we choose to connect with that
Mm-hmm.
person, we've committed.
Yes.
And we're there, and we've seen, and we've kind of, I don't know, there's just seems sometimes there are deeper
Sure.
connection there at times.
My dad doesn't talk a lot, but when he does, you listen to it, you know? Absolutely. Excuse me. Another thing I have seen helpful for people who want to, who struggle on some level with hosting, and I'm just specifically talking about, it doesn't have to be hosting, just interacting with other people.
Maybe a restaurant.
Yes, that or spiritual third wheeling. You third wheel. If you have a couple or a person you want to get to know, and or you want to something with them, interact with them, bring a comfort person along, someone that you know can help carry a conversation, or just knows you, just another person, like triangulate that conversation. It's so helpful. It's helpful for that person. It makes it less direct, confrontational. Spiritual third wheeling is extremely helpful. I mean this. I will beat this horse, this dead horse, until Jesus Christ has come back. You must use your church family. Lean on the people around you. Look into their spiritual gifts. Look into what they're capable of, the ways that they can help you. And really, I love what Robert said today. I quoted him on Facebook about leaning into the diversity that's present at church. We have so many different parts of our body, and each of them are so important. And so if I'm a hand and I really need a foot to be a good neighbor, I'm getting that foot to help me, right? That's absolutely necessary. Perfect love casts out fear. I have to remind myself of that a lot. Perfect love casts out fear. So in conclusion, I'm sorry I ran over a couple minutes. In this book, Rosaria had a very troubled background as a little girl, very troubled home, and she was talking about a day that was particularly challenging spiritually for her as a middle school girl, and she said, "Did I have Christian neighbors that might have helped, who could have known?" And that's been my challenge this week of, I don't want my neighbors, particularly the children, to wonder, could there have been someone next door who could have seen, who could have helped, who could have loved in any way that they can? Because Rosaria says in her book, God does not get the address wrong. You are meant to be their neighbor. You, the introverted, painfully scared to make eye contact person, are meant to be their neighbor. And you have the gifts perfectly suited to be their neighbor. All right, that's what I have for this week. I'm looking forward to next week. Y'all have a good day.